It's sure been a long time since we've talked about a video game here on Media Mementos. Wow, yeah, it's been since How I Would Have Made Danganronpa V3. Wow. So, what better game to break that trend than Pac-Man World? Specifically Pac-Man World 1. We might get to the other games later on in the future if this video does well. But anyways, Pac-Man World. What else can be said? Numerous people online will talk about how it's a childhood classic, or a game changer, or something that helped revitalize the Pac-Man franchise. And while yes, that's all certainly true, nobody talks about how exactly it came to be. Until now, that is. So grab a bag of Pac-Dots and get comfy. It's time for the complete history of Pac-Man World. Our story starts off in the far distant past of 1996. A team of developers led by a man named Bill Anderson pitched 8 different game concepts to Namco, 4 of which being original ideas, and 4 of them utilizing pre-existing properties. 2 of these concepts being an RPG and a Pac-Man 3D platformer similar to Mario 64. Namco said that they wanted to have a game that was utilizing a pre-existing IP, but they didn't care which one. They told the team of developers that on the spot, they were going to choose which game they made. And as I'm sure you all can gather, the developers chose the RPG. And then Namco immediately said no, saying that, in reality, they wanted that 3D Pac-Man platformer. So, yeah, to summarize that conversation, you all can make any game you'd like, just so long as it's part of an existing Namco franchise. Well, we've been toying around with this concept of an RPG featuring... No, it's gotta be Pac-Man! Despite getting Namco's express, I guess you could call that permission, to make a 3D Pac-Man game, they still had to get the Pac-Man license. In order to do that, Anderson and his team developed 3D renders showing off what Pac-Man and his enemies would look like in the 3rd dimension. The only problem was that nothing like this had ever been done before. There was no pre-existing render to build off of since Pac-Man had never been in 3D up until now, so they had to make everything from scratch. Luckily for them, Namco was pleased with what they saw and gave them the full rights to use everything in the Pac-Man series, except for Pac-Man himself. Apparently, Namco didn't want the actual character of Pac-Man to be in 3D, but something similar to him instead. Kinda goes without saying that this was a major hurdle for the team to overcome, but it wasn't long before Anderson was able to find a solution. This solution would end up becoming Pac-Man Ghost Zone. The story would revolve around you, the player, who was playing a Pac-Man game, only to be sucked inside the Pac-Man world by an evil force named the Ghost Master, who would turn you into Pac-Man, and it would be up to you to go around the Ghost Zone, trying to stop the ghost from doing whatever evil scheme they're up to this week, and finding your way back to the real world. Is it just me, or does that sound a lot like the Cheetah Man from Action 52? Huh. Oh well, I'm sure that's a coincidence. Anderson says that this concept came around when he was thinking to himself, where did these ghosts come from? What's their story? What is their plan? And it would be up to Ghost Zone to answer those questions. Namco approved of the idea, so Namco of America got right to work on the concept. Just as the original pitch promised, Pac-Man Ghost Zone was going to be a lot like Mario 64. In fact, scarily similar, delving into rip-off territory in some respects, being a high-flying adventure with new enemies, an overly cartoony art style, and more collectibles than the player would know what to do with. While this may have made for a fun game, Namco was becoming increasingly concerned that it wasn't making for a good Pac-Man game. The longer Ghost Zone was in development, the further it got away from the Pac-Man series. It was starting to become a lot like Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, or Star Fox Adventures, where there's a recognizable video game character being placed into another game that's totally not his own. Because of this, and the fact that the game wasn't turning out as Namco had hoped, Namco officially pulled the plug on the project, firing almost everybody involved. And keep in mind, Ghost Zone was fairly far along in production. There were alpha builds of some levels, publications were reporting on the game, and they'd already worked out a deal with Sony to put the game on the PlayStation, mostly because the PlayStation was the only console at the time that was strong enough to handle what the game would need. Even so, it didn't matter. Namco decided to start from scratch, only keeping one member of the Ghost Zone staff on board, Scott Rogers, who would end up becoming the head of the new 3D Pac-Man project. Rogers learned a hard lesson from this ordeal: stray too far from Pac-Man and Namco will make sure your project stops. But what was he going to do instead of Ghost Zone? Well, thankfully, Namco gave him an extra year to work on it, pushing the release date back from 97 to 98, which just so happened to coincide with Pac-Man's 20th anniversary. Namco decided to use this brand new 3D Pac-Man game to celebrate, so right away the pressure was on. But what was Anderson and his new team going to do for this game? At first, they decided to make something a bit closer to the Pac-Man cartoon. The story would revolve around the Ghost Zone trying to take away all the power pellet trees, and then Pac-Man would have to go all around Pac-Land to track them down. The team was envisioning this to be a reimagining or follow-up to Pac-Land, but Namco said that they'd never seen trees look good in a video game before, so they told them to ditch the trees and come up with a new idea altogether. And when they did, it ensured that absolutely nothing from Ghost Zone made it over into the new game. Instead, they came up with the concept of a small ghost named Orson being jealous of Pac-Man's success, finally snapping and deciding to become Pac-Man, building a robotic suit known as Talkman, kidnapping all of Pac-Man's friends right before his 20th birthday. So now, Pac-Man must venture to Ghost Island to save his friends, and to stop Talkman's evil plan. Unlike the other versions of this game, which used Mario 64 as the main inspiration, this time, the main inspiration would be Crash Bandicoot, mostly in terms of the level layout and fixed camera. When it came to the levels themselves, Disneyland of all things was the main inspiration, such as Tomorrowland or Pirates of the Caribbean, or Caribbean, depending on how you say it. Throughout this new game's production, now known as Pac-Man World by the way, there was a constant tightrope being walked as to making a new game and a new Pac-Man game. As Rogers would describe it, we wanted the game to be playable by the core gamer audience at that time, but we also wanted the game to be familiar and accessible to an older generation of casual game players who remember Pac-Man from their childhood. Since there had never been a game made like this for Pac-Man before, Pac-Man World could be literally anything that the developers wanted. While Namco did have some strict guidelines for what they would and would not allow, they were also lenient with what the developers could make. So long as they adhered to the rules, this would be their game. So whenever things felt like they were straying too far from Pac-Man, there would be added elements like fruit collectibles, or Pac-Dots, or even brand new additions to the Pac-Man canon. This is the first game that established Pinky as a female, not a male as he had been before. This happened because the model sheets at Namco Japan were all labeled Sue instead of Pinky, and then from there it just kinda stuck. That change, as well as adding Puka to the main cast, who was very popular in Japan, were the only things added to Pac-Man World that would explicitly appeal to the Japanese audience. Pac-Man World was made for the West first and foremost. Namco didn't exactly see Pac-Man as a franchise so much as they did a mascot. Something like Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, or Sonic the Hedgehog. And since Pac-Man had much more popularity in the West, they wanted this project to be tailor-made for the West's tastes. Whatever was popular in 3D platformers over in America, there had to be some inspiration put into Pac-Man World. All while making it its own thing, of course. While development was going smoothly, time was running out. This caused several planned concepts to be ultimately scrapped, such as the giant Pac-Man maze, or having more animated cutscenes than just the beginning and end. Speaking of those cutscenes, there was also the matter of Pac-Man's voice. Characters like Miss Pac-Man or Talkman would be able to speak, but unfortunately, nobody was able to agree on what exactly Pac-Man would sound like, so they came to the logical compromise and didn't have him speak at all. It wouldn't be until Pac-Man World 3 where the character would finally get a voice. At least in terms of the game, because he did talk in the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, but anyways. This also caused some aspects of the game not receiving the necessary amount of polish that they needed, most notably in Anubis Rex, which the development team has since regretted making as difficult as it was. But even so, they had to chug along and make the best game they could. When it came time for E3, Namco made a big fuss about Pac-Man World. There'd been some previous buzz about the game since it was a long-delayed title finally making its way to the PlayStation, so Namco decided to capitalize on it by appealing to people's nostalgia, which apparently went over very well, and they also pumped out as many demo discs as they could, showing off this game's technical prowess, which, again, went over very well amongst consumers. Pac-Man World was in a prime position to be a big hit. And as it turns out, it was. It was released sporadically throughout various territories at the end of 1999, and they all loved it, with it selling over 1 million copies in America alone. The graphics were a major selling point, of course, but people loved the worlds and the gameplay and the music. It was a bigger hit than expected, causing Namco to immediately delve into producing a sequel. There was a Game Boy Advance release in 2004, which was also well received. A direct sequel was released in 2002, and a pseudo-sequel was released later in 2005. And then in 2022, there was a full-on remake of Pac-Man World. While being a bit of an unexpected announcement, people were excited to see one of their childhood games come back to life. And while yes, there were some changes, the Pac-Man World remake was reviewed quite well, just like the original, sparking many theories as to whether or not the other games in the series would get the same treatment. I guess we'll find out in a couple years. I'd give anything for a Pac-Man World 2 remake, man. So there's the story of Pac-Man World, which, as it turns out, was 2 games in 1. Who would have thought that a game starting off as a Mario 64 cash-in, one that ultimately got scrapped and had to be started over twice, would end up becoming such an influential icon in the PlayStation library? You know what? I'm glad it did. I don't want to picture a world without Pac-Man World. That's the kind of world where hot snow falls up, let me tell you. Well, folks, thanks for watching the video. What'd you guys think? Have you played Pac-Man World before? And if not, why are you watching this video? Anyways, comment below and let me know because I'm always excited to hear what you guys have to say. And now it's time to thank our wonderful Patreon people, starting with our Masters of Fate. Chan 11, Drew the Stew, Elisamir Rogers Archer, Kev Messick, Platinum Bass, Quiet Chap, Ryan Williams, Timey, and Woody Woo. And now our executive producers, Albert Robinson, Blackjack, H.R. Hoffman, Indiscreet One, Leaf Storm, Ravioli Supremo, Unkale, and who else but Zane. If you two would like your name read at the end of every Media Mementos video, then please consider donating to the Patreon. There's a link in the description below for you to check out. There are also links to the Media Mementos Discord server, as well as the second channel, Media Mementos Extra, where we have behind-the-scenes videos, short clips, and other sorts of subjectively entertaining things. Alright folks, thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you guys next time!